Welcome to Unit 3.1. In this unit, we're going to explore a function called the Vlookup. The V stands for vertical lookup, which looks up in columns. That's what the V stands for. Let's look at a simple example over here. In this particular example, the minute I type the branch code, I want the branch description to appear. And it's going to be looking from here into this little table here in H and I. Normally this would be on another sheet, it could be in another file. But for this particular exercise, we're just going to keep it on the same sheet. Just some things to keep in mind with your VLOOKUPs is there must be something to match from the one spreadsheet to the other. So in other words, in this case, I'm going to be matching on the branch code. This could be a cost center, it could be an ID number, but it must be unique and there must be something to match. The other thing is, let's have a look. Let's start the formula, VLOOKUP. Let's click on Insert Function. The first thing it asks is for a lookup value. In other words, what must it match here in order to find a match in this table? A lot of people make the mistake of actually selecting the code in the lookup table. The code it's actually looking for is in this data over here. So my lookup value would be the code. And that's always going to be a single cell, not a range of cells. It's got to match on a single cell. Right, then the next thing is the table array. In other words, where must it look up into? Now with your table array, you're going to, I wouldn't highlight like this, because if you did highlight like that, first of all, if you added another row or two, some different areas there, your VLOOKUP wouldn't update. The other thing is you'd have to F4 it or keep it absolute with your dollars, because the minute you copy down, the table will then read there, and the next line there, then the next line there, and then suddenly you type a 1 and it says it can't be found. So the best thing to do when selecting your table array is to select on the column letters here. So in other words, the whole column. What that means is that if this particular column you had extra records, you could just add it at the bottom and it would update with your formulas here on your left. The other thing you need to be aware of is that it always finds the match in the first column. So if you highlight it like that, it would tell you it couldn't find it because it cannot match. It needs to match on the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So remember that your lookup value must always be in the leftmost column. Okay, so we now have H to I selected. Column index number. That always has to be a number, and it cannot be higher than the number of columns selected. So in other words, I couldn't put 3 there because I only selected 2 columns in this table array. This does confuse people somewhat because we always refer to columns as column A, column B, column C. But in this case, it's a 1 and a 2. Column H being the first column in the range and the second column being the north, south, east, west, column I. So sometimes you'll be putting a 15 in there because it would be the 15th column from the range you're pulling. In this case, we want to return what is in the second column. So I wouldn't put column I here, I would put a 2. It always has to be a number. Then the range lookup, if you actually read at the bottom, it says is a logical value to find the closest match. And if you put, so in other words, if I put 0 there, it would find an exact match. If I put 1 there, it would find the nearest. We will do one where we do use 1. Sometimes you may see the word false. That means the same as 0. Or you might see the word true, which means number 1, find the nearest. Right, so we've got our lookup value in A1. Our table array is from column H to I. And remember, we highlight the whole column. Which column do we want to return? What's in the second column of the range? And find an exact match. Let's click on OK. And there it will find all the regions. If I happen to change the 5 to a 6, you'll often see that NA error, which means not applicable. It didn't find anything in the table to look up into. It doesn't exist. Let's make it a 5 again. Again, always test your formula. Let's change that to a 2. Or to a 3, and you can see how it has changed. Let's try another exercise. Over here I have branch codes, and I want to pull from the other sheet I'm going to show you now a description of that branch and the amount outstanding in 120 days. Let's have a look at our lookup table. So here we have branch codes, branch descriptions, the value in 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120 days. And so the first thing we need to ask ourselves is, what can we find a match on? And in this case it's going to be our branch code. Please note how in our range A to F, our branch code is always first. It looks to the leftmost column. What column is our branch description in over here? It's in the second column of the range. So I'm now ready to write my VLOOKUP. Equals V. Go to my insert function. First thing it's asking for is my lookup value, and remember that's always going to be in this table, not the other table. What is our common denominator here? Our branch code. So let's click on A2. Our table array, it's asking where it must look up into. Let's go into the table, and remember, always highlight on the whole column. Column index number, I know I looked before I started my formula, the description is in column 2, and I want an exact match. What that means is, if there was no 35, it wouldn't find 34. If I said the nearest, in other words, I put a 1 here, it would find the nearest match. So in this case, we want an exact match. And there we go. If I change it, it will adjust accordingly. Let's do another formula for the 120 days. Before we do that, let's go and have a look. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's in the 6th column. Equals V. Function, insert function. Look up on our branch code again. Our table array will be A to F. Column index number, as we know, it's the 6th column, and find an exact match. And there is our example of how it's pulled in the 120 days from the lookup table. Let's check it. 36 is Toyota Santon, 7258, 7258. Let's also look at VLOOKUP when you use find the nearest match at the end. Over here I have what we refer to as an aging analysis. And in this particular exercise, it's only giving the days overdue. It's not putting into categories like current, 30 days, etc. Let's have a look at our lookup table. I've gone and created a little lookup table. 0 to 29 days is current, 30 to 59 days is 30 days, etc., etc. So I've gone and created a little lookup table. You may have wanted to do a nested if here, which you could. It would just be a lot longer, and this is a much cleaner formula. Obviously, if it looks up on 14 and it goes to the table, in the leftmost column it will not find a 14. So I could not put find an exact match in this example. It would just say it's not found. So let's try this. Equals V. Look up on the insert function. My lookup value would be the days overdue. My table array is where must it look up into. A to C. Remember, highlight the whole column. Which column do I want to return? What's in the 3rd column? And over here I don't put a 0, I put a 1, find the nearest match, and OK. And there you can see 14 days is current, 58 days is still in the 30 days category there. 62 days is 60 days. So you can use VLOOKUP with a 0 or a 1 at the end. And remember that it has to match from one table to the next, and it always looks to the leftmost column of the lookup table.